Udayan, we got a good overview on the background of the Indian pharma industry. So, but what are the today? What are the strengths of the Indian pharma for the industry as such?
So let me take you back a little. If you look at the pharma value chain, you start with intermediates, advanced intermediates, then you go to APIs, then you go to finished dosage form. You move on to things like new chemical entities or NCEs, biotechnology, biosimilars. Now there are new things which are being added, which means much better improved delivery systems and targeted drugs, personal care drugs, etc. So India strength lies, unfortunately, in the bottom three. So we are very strong in all three of those. In fact, intermediates is new and it's been developing only in the last 5 or 10 years. But as far as APIs manufacturing and finished dosage form manufacturing is concerned, we are very strong there. And our strengths are we have become experts as far as reverse engineering is concerned in any kind of, whether it is being molecular chemistry, biochemistry, medicinal chemistry, we have mastered that task. I mean, the toughest product is thrown at Indian industry and we managed to find a way out of it. Second strength is that we are really, I think, it goes along with the reverse engineering skills is process chemistry part of it. Third, I would say is that there is a tremendous amount of entrepreneurial skin in India. So if you really see how the Indian industry has developed, Aurobindo started, Dr. Ram Prasad Reddy, who is the CMD of Aurobindo, used to work with a company called SOL. So similarly, there are many people who actually left these stalwarts and then started out. So today you see these other companies like Hetero Drugs, Aurobindo Drugs, for that matter, even Lupin and all these people, they started off from somewhere else and then they went on to become big giants themselves. So, and this is a great thing to have happened, and it's crossed various levels. So today you have the same things going on at levels of 50 crores plus, at 500 crores plus, at 2000 crores plus, and $1 billion plus. So you are finding these kind of development going on. And the third biggest advantage I see is that our knowledge of the language. For us, it has been a boon actually that most of us were educated with an English background, especially in the science subjects. As a result of that, when Indian industry tries to export its products to the world market, most of the regulated agencies, whether it is the United States, whether it is the Japanese PMDA, whether it's the European Union, the Russian MOH or UK MHRA, all these agencies expect that the documentation should be clear, concise, and properly written, articulate enough for anybody to understand. And that's where India's strength is as compared to China. Chinese people, unfortunately, have a pictorial language, and when they try to convert it into English, sometimes they make certain very grave errors. More than that, we have been taught the language, we have been taught the sciences in this language.
So medium, right?
Regulatory compliance levels, the quality of our regulatory documentation has been excellent, actually, I would say. And one more very important aspect of India's strengths is that our overheads are much lower than many parts of the world. Even compared to China, our overheads are lesser. Compared to the world's largest market, which is the United States and the Japanese market, which is the most sophisticated market, our overheads are approximately 35% and 60% lower, respectively, with respect to USA and to Japan. The Japan is a high-cost economy, so even if we take that out of contention, let's focus just on the European Union and on USA, and we are at least 30% lower than either of them on an average. Now that is a competitive edge. That is a huge competitive edge which we have.
So despite the low cost and low overheads, do we have a strong credibility in terms of quality of the products that we make?
We now have a very strong credibility, and that's the reason why when I was sharing with you the numbers, like 40% of the generic market in the United States of America is catered to by Indian companies making the
Right.
drugs in India. So a
Right.
few years back, there was this big brouhaha about a book written by an American regulator, and this was about called The Bottle of Lies. It was about the Ranbaxy stories. But unfortunately, nobody picked up the battle on behalf of Ranbaxy and also put across the points why such things actually happen. This is a constant battle going on, Venkat. It's very difficult to pinpoint who has won which, who has lost which, but this is an ongoing battle and will probably not stop till all these drug industries actually set up offices, set up R&D centers in India and understand the local challenges and understand why Indians went about doing reverse engineering, why the government of India decided that we will have um, the open patent, open license scheme, that we will manufacture even if there is a patent existing, if it is to benefit the Indian population.
Yeah, but why would they like to understand, right? I mean, what is the incentive for them to understand,
because at
say,
the
right?
because at the end of the day, you cannot ignore a 1.3 billion population. You
Yeah, so
cannot.
they can still not understand, just
They,
live with it.
they will live with it.
They,
I think you put it better. They will learn to live with it over a period of time. They learn to live with it. And secondly, they also cannot deny the fact that the kind of capacities which exist now in India, especially in the finished dosage form, and the quality of documentation is very high. And there are also a number of companies within the United States, especially second tier, B tier, and C tier companies, which are actually being bought by Indian companies or Indian entrepreneurs. So one expects that over a period of time, many of these regulatory bodies, many of these large corporations will be manned by senior Indians in various places. And therefore, culturally, they would be closer to India and China.
depends, but yeah.
I mean,
There's
it's
one more
a,
thing. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a,
But related to that, I would probably talk about that, we have a large sort of manpower pool in that regard, right? Scientific manpower, especially pharma chemistry, organic chemistry, and so on and so forth. So, but is it, beyond the numbers, how good have they been? I mean, you have talked about their ability to, in terms of come out with alternate processes and so on. So I respect that from those people. But other than that, is it only the few people, or is it there's a talent from top to bottom? How would you rate that?
see let's talk of the value chain first. So whether it is you start with drug discovery, then you start with the process, the manufacturing process, and the manufacturing process itself has many steps. So you first make the API, then you convert it into the finished dosage form. It doesn't end there. Then there are issues regarding logistics and handling, because every drug cannot be handled in the same way. You can't put it in a box and export it or sell it.
After COVID, we all know about
Correct.
that.
And
When
then
the vaccines were to be stored at low temperatures, right? So,
absolutely. And then it comes to the whole concept of selling it. So selling and distribution in the pharma industry has a very different connotation as compared to everywhere else.
yeah, absolutely.
There is a high degree of applications engineering required. So if you find that the medical representative in a country, let's say like Mexico or Turkey, has to go with an Indian drug and compare it with the counterpart, let's say from GSK or from BMS or from Pfizer, he has to bring out a lot of studies. He has to show the doctor or the clinical physician that this is how the studies went and this is the efficacy, this is the impact of side effects, the clinical phase 3, clinical phase 4 studies, etc. So you need expertise. What I meant was that you need expertise in all these. Before that, when you actually start selling, the first part of the selling is the submission of the documents to a particular country. So if you're exporting an API, you have to submit what is known as a drug master file. And the drug master file is the Bible of the entire product. It's chemistry, it's physics, it's appearance, it's degradation in light, in aggravated conditions, temperature, moisture, etc., etc. The raw material supplies, where they have come from and whether they have been validated under GMP conditions, etc. It's a very detailed document. It goes over thousands of pages in certain cases. In case you have made the product, you also need to put it in stability studies. So it requires a huge amount of patience, investment. You have to keep the product for, we actually store our drugs for 5 years so that we have a real-time stability data for 5 years. And at every station of 3 months, our scientists and our technicians actually measure the original product versus and they try to plot any kind of degradation which might have occurred during this period. 5 years, 3 months, sincerely, honestly, with as much of fidelity as possible, compiling of that data and then submission of that data. Now, the same goes for the finished dosage form. So you can well imagine how elaborate and how meticulous the task is. And for this, you need a very high degree of skill. So when you ask whether we have skilled chemists, we have skilled chemists, we have skilled technicians. And I always, maybe it's a habit, it has become a habit. I always worry that why isn't India investing more in this, in the upper end of the industry? Like, why are we not making the instruments? Because we have very good instrument scientists in India. So whether it is an NMR, India doesn't make NMRs. You know, this is for defining the crystalline structure of a product, or whether it is a GC or an HPLC. Now we buy all these instruments, but believe me when I say so, when we send our scientists to, let's say, Agilent in Singapore for training on some of those gas chromatography equipment, and this happens very often because when you buy new equipment, they allow you that you can send 2 of your. They eventually find that it is Indians who are training them, whether it is in Hong Kong or in Singapore or in Sydney or in USA. It is eventually they find that it is the Indian technicians who are actually giving them training. Most of the cases. I'm not saying they aren't. So what I'm trying to say is that there is strength in India in across this entire range. It's not just the chemistry process. That's the glamorous end of it. But the back end of it is the people who make the documentation, who do all the microbial studies, who do all the stability studies, who compile the data. So we have good expertise. I'm very happy that we have a huge manpower which is skilled across the range, right from here to there.
So let's talk about some of the weaknesses, right? So what are the weaknesses of Indian pharma industry?
I think the biggest weakness which stares at us is our challenge from China, which also happens to be our largest competitor. So Indian drug industry went through various phases. So sometimes in the 1990s, when we actually started seriously looking at the world and we started developing reverse engineered processes and started putting our drugs in the market, we got very caught up in that. And perhaps we never stopped and we never looked back that what are we doing. So we based almost all our chemistry, all our products were based largely on basic products which were coming from 2 sources. The largest source was China. And then the second source was Europe. There were several other manufacturers in Europe who were also. Over a period of time, it has largely become only China. And today, I think there are some initiatives which are coming up from Government of India. Those initiatives, in my opinion, are about 10, 15 years too late. But having said that, better late than never. So we are working on those, on that particular weakness to build strength in our own capability, especially in the field of intermediates, basic intermediates. There are certain things on which we really need to have industry-wide, it's across industry forums are required. And this can only happen under the auspices of the central government or the Department of Pharmaceuticals. So that's another weakness that we have never really got around. We have never wrapped our heads around that. So if the pharma industry calls a meet, you will eventually find only people from the pharma industry there. Whereas in my opinion, we should have people from the steel industry there. We should have people from instrumentation, electronics there. We should have people from biotechnology there, so that there is an overall, you have an overall look. So that's another weakness, that in terms of policy, while we have good policy with respect to specific industry, we don't have I had a discussion with one of our classmates, Tushar, who's, as you know, was
Steel.
big time into steel.
So we
And we were
interviewed him some
discussing
time
this.
back.
We
Yeah.
were discussing this in the offices of the Secretary of the Government of India for Pharmaceuticals some months back, and we were debating the question that even if India wants to become big in scientific instruments or delivery devices, etc., do we have the materials for those? Do we have those alloys? Do we have that steel? Do we have the ability to build those composites? And the answer, unfortunately, was no. So that's a weakness. And
Right.
we hope that we did make enough sound that day, me and Tushar, that probably there will be more such meetings now.
So back to the pharma raw materials. So what you're saying is, if I understood you correctly, India is not self-reliant, and especially for key pharma raw materials. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And that would also mean that China, if progresses further down the value chain, I'm sure they are making, but then if they want to strengthen that area, they would be much more price competitive because they have a better control over the early stage raw materials. Is that correct?
It used to be traditionally that, and initially Indian industry did suffer a bit on that account. But very quickly we realized what our strength was. And our strength was the compliance. So if you really look at India's $20 billion of exports, 4 billion is API, and the balance is vaccines and finished dosage forms, etc., etc. Now, Chinese numbers are, I would say, bigger than ours, no doubt about it. But then they also, if you see the average price that we fetch on any product, whether it is the finished dosage or the API, is between 15 to 25% more. So on APIs, we fetch inevitably, we always fetch 10 to 15% higher. And I do it day in and day out. So I'm talking from a position of knowing the market. And we do it, we don't even need to say that, listen, you cannot compare us with China. Most customers in the regulated world know that Indians are known for, there is a term in our industry, and that is called OTAC, on time and accepted quality. That means that the quality is consistent to what the original listing was given, and you're delivering on time. Now, these become issues because people buy, they have a schedule, whether it is running their production lines, whether it is their launch in the market. They have ERP systems which run very smoothly, and they don't want upheavals in that. What happened last year was terrible for many countries. I'll talk about it later as one of the threads which is coming up. So they want stability, they want consistency. So for that, they pay a higher price. So therefore, that is where India, despite the fact that we are not strong in several key raw materials, we still manage to get a better price than.
So over what time period do you think this advantage, competitive advantage, OTAQ, OTAC competitive advantage is sustainable? Can we sustain it for next 5 years, 10 years? Because what happens if China systematically, wants to chisel that?
So I can't say that China is not already caught up on some of the things with us. But what I feel is that we now have a head start. So
sure.
That's typically talking of OTAC. Now, where is it reflected actually in business? Because of consistency, one of the things which, actually the Q part is quality consistency. It's not Q as in. So because of the consistency aspects, you will find when you knock on the doors of several customers in USA, whether these are these big chains, Walgreens, etc., which buy medicines, or Green Cross, the several chains which buy Cardinal Health, etc. They believe that their focus is the supply, their strength is the supply chain, the logistics, and therefore they don't want any upheavals in that. And nowhere along the line do they want any kind of recall. So 2 years back, there was a particular hypertension drug which went through huge upheaval because they discovered that there were some traces of a carcinogenic compound produced within the drug manufacturing process. And these big companies had to force the Chinese manufacturers to recall. And the whole pharmaceutical industry, this is 2018 I'm talking of, the whole pharmaceutical industry went through an upheaval because of that, because their supply chains were totally disrupted. They just didn't know how to deal with that kind of a problem. It was something which they had never even anticipated that this could happen.
Right.
So as we go along, they are finding that it is easier to rely on Indian suppliers because they tend to take care of these aspects as compared to our competitors.
Okay.
As
So
compared to our
that brings up another concern that I have. You know, if we are so much dependent on the pharma raw materials on them, there could be many forms of supply chain risk that Indian pharmaceutical industry would also be facing, right? So, are there initiatives that we are having?
There are
And
initiatives. There are
in India, and what are the missing pieces? What are the good pieces? Give us some examples.
the good pieces are that the government of India has a kind of really become very active in it, and we have had a couple of very uh, well-intentioned and very focused policy measures coming up from the government of India. And one of them came up as late as last year, which was the uh, promotion of Indian industry, which was done primarily with the purpose of de-risking our over-reliance on Chinese materials. Government is also promising that they will give incentive to the industry for setting up of these kind of industries so that we de-risk our supply chain. At the same time, there are certain gaps which are left. Along with us, there are many other companies in the country who are called regularly by government officials for interactions, etc. at different times. We meet informally, formally. Whenever we do meet, we put our point across. And the purpose of this is to fill up the missing gaps, as you say. So, for example, if we look at a product like penicillin, now India is totally reliant as far as penicillin supply is concerned on China. To build penicillin supplies in India requires an overall view. And that overall view means that penicillin production it's a fermentation process, it's a bioprocess, and therefore it is very power intensive. And the ambient temperature also makes a lot of difference. Because if you try to produce penicillin in a place like Chennai with high humidity and high ambient temperature, it is not going to be successful. But if you set up a plant somewhere in the foothills of Himalaya, it is going to be very successful because that's where the world's first penicillin plant actually was set up.
Rishikesh, Hindustan.
No, in India, of course, in Rishikesh and IDPL, but actually in the world, it also was in Austria. It was just, you can well imagine the environment there. So things like that. So we do give these kind of inputs to the government officials that look at it holistic way. Secondly, there's another big product which is making a lot of noise nowadays. The Chinese are controlling the key raw material, which is para-aminophenol, which goes into the production of paracetamol. Now, India is one of the largest producers of paracetamol, so much so that about 6 or 7 years back, one of the largest producers of paracetamol in India and one of the largest producers of paracetamol in China entered into a joint venture. And this was the first of its kind. I mean, it's about 7 or 8 years back, if I remember correctly. But, instead of taking that as an example and saying, or rather promoting that during the trade talks with China on a government to government level, I think somewhere we lost the plot. That is what should have been happening. That should have been happening on a daily basis, where the Indian government or the trade officials should have been convincing the Chinese counterparts that, listen, your strength is this. Why don't you build on that and let us build on this, and let's work hand in hand. Let's work hand in hand. So today India is suffering from para-aminophenol. We may have a few plants which will come up to start manufacturing these kind of phenols. But why China is strong in para-aminophenol? Because they make certain kinds of para-aminophenol for them is actually a kind of a byproduct which comes from something which they make for the fertilizer industry. So that's where, if you have a think tank where people from the chemicals, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, see there are certain kinds of, for example, reactor vessels, etc., will require a particular kind of alloy. That alloy is not available in India. It may be worthwhile to call a representative of Steel Authority or Jindal Steel, somebody, and ask them that, could you do this? It's not that India is not capable of doing metallurgy. We have very good metallurgy expertise. But can you do this on a commercial scale so that we don't have to wait for the world to supply us these kind of composite materials or these kind of alloy steel? So this is what I am talking about. So we are on the right track is what I would say. But yes, we still have a lot of catching up to do. So unless we constantly keep on tweaking our policy and keep on building on that, some of these initiatives may not take off.
Nice. What about putting these things together, like, in the context of, like, when you talk about cross industry and so on, what about having, R&Ds and knowledge centers and things like that, so that all of these can come together?
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the key things which I believe should be happening. So actually,
we are weak in that. That's
we are
also
weak in that, but again, let me assure you that there is thinking going on this direction in the government of India, because last time I happened to have a discussion with very senior official in the Ministry, Department of Pharmaceuticals. I was advised that the government of India is coming out or has already come out with a basic policy for setting up of 3 such technology parks. Now,
okay. Interesting.
It's good. It's well thought out, and I could see, because when the gentleman was talking, he was addressing quite a few of the key issues, that there will be not just a skill development center, there will be R&D incubator cells. But I don't want to deflate this effort, but compare that with Poland, a small country with barely a population of about 27, 28 million people. There are 16 such centers just between the city of Warsaw and Krakow. These are just 2 cities. So, and they are nowhere on the world map of pharmaceuticals. And India is so huge as compared to them. We are so huge as compared to them. I mean, their total pharmaceutical spend is just about 5 or 6 billion. We have 40 billion. Our healthcare spend is expected to touch 300 billion. I mean, we are vast. But in comparison to that, we are still talking of only about 3 or 4 NIPERs, that is the Institute of Pharmaceutical Education and Research. And these are centers of excellence. We have one in Mohali from which we hire on a regular basis, which is very good. Similarly, there are quite a few more. There is one in Hyderabad, there is one in Gwalior, etc., etc. What I mean is that there have to be 20 of those. And what I mean is that along with those, many years ago, I was on a project working with the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, and they had set up a strategic small incubator section where industry was being invited, and they would they would wet lease the facility, which had everything there, the instrument. There was a central instrumentation cell, so you could use their headspace GC, you could use their NMR, they had all the latest equipments and instruments, and they were trying to promote that. Now you need multiplication of that by 100 times everywhere. Every big city, small city in India needs that. You cannot have just one CDRI and one Indian Institute of Science Bangalore. And if you have them, then you need to develop technology hubs around it. So our recommendation to the government of India would be that when you set up this knowledge center or knowledge park or technology park focused on pharma, build a pharma hub around it. Ensure that there are incentives given. So like you have a policy for export promotion zones. So similarly, there could be policies. So till some time back, the government of India, the taxation laws allowed us to write off our R&D expenses. But those have been changed. Similarly, there was a huge amount of incentive being given to for promotion of exports. So there was this category called MEIS scheme, under which we would get 2 to 3% benefit along with the drawback. Now these incentives are slowly being converted or changed or reduced. Now these will not really, I think they should be promoted rather than decrease, especially in certain key industries. If India is exporting $20 billion worth of pharmaceutical products to the world, and that figure is expected to touch somewhere about 70 billion by the year 2035. Now, you're not talking of a small amount. Even today, out of total exports, India's total exports of what, 300 odd billion dollars, $20 billion is just one single industry. And I'm not even talking of services. I'm just purely talking of just these two things, finished dosage forms, which come in the form of medicines and vaccines and APIs. There's nothing more than that.
Excellent points, Udayan. I think we would soon, get into discussions about the opportunities that they could look at. So I think very good discussions on the strengths as well as the weaknesses. Thank you for joining us in yet another episode of Move Conversations. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to the Move Conversations YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get notifications of new episodes. Thank you very much. Till I see you in the next episode. Thank you very much. Have a great day.